All right, welcome to video 3 of lesson 12. This will be our last video for this lesson. We talked about microscopic skeletal contraction in the last video. Now we're going to move on and kind of talk about the different types of muscle contraction and where we get energy for muscle contraction. So when we look at muscle contraction, there's different degrees of graded responses. So basically how often and how quickly muscles can contract. So we can basically change this response in two ways. One is changing the frequency of the neuron signals that we're sending there, or the nerve impulses we're sending there, or we can also change the number of cells being stimulated at one time. So if you look at this chart down here, we want to get to complete tetanus, and that's where we have a constant and frequent impulse here for muscle contraction. So muscle twitch, and if you think about it, we've all had a muscle twitch at some point. This is not the way that muscles normally act and is a result of a nervous system problem. Most of the times it's fine and you may just have a buildup of acetylcholine maybe left in the synaptic cleft, or you have an excess of calcium that's been released. But this is just when you have a quick contraction and the muscle doesn't even get to fully relax because it's so quick. What we want to get to is complete or fused tetanus, and this is when we are rapidly sending nerve impulses to the muscle so that your contraction is smooth and sustained. So if we go back to this, a twitch is kind of just a single quick contraction. And what we want is we want to get it to the point where we're sending enough signals that we have this just smooth and constant muscle contraction until we no longer want it. So muscle responds to a stronger stimuli. How forcefully a muscle contracts is going to depend on how many of its cells are stimulated. The more motor units that are active, the more stronger your stimulus is going to be. So if you remember, a motor unit is the neuron and all the muscle cells that it innervates. You do not have one neuron stimulating your entire quadricep muscle, for example. You have lots of neurons and lots of motor units doing that. So the more motor units you're stimulating is going to increase the number of muscle fibers also being stimulated. All right, so providing energy from muscle contraction. There's a few ways that we can provide ATP to get our muscles contracted. One is creatine phosphate, and if you're a sprinter or an athlete, you may have heard of taking creatinine as as like a vitamin almost. And really, this only is good for sprinting or like powerlifting. And this is going to produce ATP for about 15 seconds. And like I said, if you look and take a creatine supplement, it doesn't do you any good if you are a soccer player or a football player. This is for people that need 15 seconds of energy, and that's it. Then we have aerobic respiration. Aerobic means that we're going to use oxygen. This occurs in the mitochondria. Okay, this is our basic cellular respiration that you learned in biology. This is when we are using oxygen and glucose to produce a lot of ATP through the electron transport chain. And then we have anaerobic respiration. Once again, this is really good for sprinting and doing strong contractions. Okay, like I said, if you're going to squat your body weight and you're just going to do one set of like 10, that's when we use anaerobic respiration. Anaerobic means without oxygen, so this doesn't require any oxygen. And this would just be glycolysis when looking at cellular respiration. So we take glucose and we break it down into pyruvic acid, but we only get 2 ATP out of it. Normally, when we're using aerobic respiration, that pyruvic acid is then going to go to the mitochondria and we yield our 36 ATP. But when you don't have oxygen, pyruvic acid is converted to lactic acid, and if you've ever worked out really hard and the next day your muscles are really sore, it's because you have a buildup of lactic acid in your muscles. And what's really interesting is they really used to think that lactic acid was a waste product and your body flushed it out eventually. Now they're kind of finding out that lactic acid can be reused to make more ATP if needed. So kind of just an interesting tidbit. So like I said, we only use glycolysis, this anaerobic glycolysis, for 30 to 60 seconds. It's fast, but it's not efficient. We're only getting 5% of ATP per glucose molecule compared to if we took that pyruvic acid, shoved it into the mitochondria, and yielded 32 to 36 ATP. So here is that lactic acid fermentation where you get that buildup of lactic acid. You're just going through glycolysis, so you're creating that pyruvic acid, but that's turning into lactate, which turns into the lactic acid and makes you really sore. Now we're going to get on to muscle contraction types. We're only going to talk about two, isotonic and isometric. Isotonic is your normal muscle contraction. So this is where you're running and your muscles are shortening. It's really important to remember that muscles shorten when they contract, and that's because remember, the actin are sliding past each other and the sarcomeres are getting shorter, so all your muscle shortens. So any kind of normal exercise you do is going to be isotonic. Isometric is when your muscles do not shorten, but they're trying to. We use isometric exercises a lot of times post-surgery. So if you're looking into being a physical therapist, if you're post-surgery on your knee and you're not supposed to be bending your knee or really moving your knee, we can do isometric exercises where the muscles are still contracting, but we're not moving. So if you take your hand and just push it up against a wall as hard as you can for a long time, your muscles are going to start to burn, but you're not moving. That's an example of an isometric exercise. Okay, last thing we're going to talk about is the effect on exercise and muscles. So aerobic exercise would be jogging, biking, swimming, anything where you're using a lot of oxygen. These individuals are going to be more resistant to fatigue. Their muscles actually have more mitochondria in them, so they're able to produce more ATP and really use everything efficiently. But this does not cause muscles to increase in size. And when you look at someone who's a marathon runner, they're very skinny, they're very lean. They don't have a lot of large muscle mass. But then our strength training, we're doing lots of isometric exercises like weightlifting, we're forcing the muscles to contract, and the muscles are going to grow in size. And when you look at that picture down there, someone who's sprinting and using full muscle contraction as fast as they can for a short amount of time compared to a marathon runner, it's a big difference in muscle size. All right, so that is it for lesson 12. Make sure your note guides are filled out. You can rewatch the videos if you need to, and now complete all your assignments.